Planning is crucial for Paper 1, Section B. I'm going to share with you 4 detailed plans from past paper questions, talk you through them, and therefore help you give you the ideas that you need for Thursday's exam. Stay tuned, plan better. Schofield on Shakespeare.
This section is out of 40, but 24 marks are essentially for how well you've structured your piece for effect, how well you have understood the text type, and the extent to which you've nailed the tone. Planning is therefore crucial in order to be able to hoover up the full 24 marks for AO5. In June 2023, the question asked you to write a talk for parents advising them how to help their children eat healthier food. How would you plan a 9-paragraph response for this question? What would you include within each paragraph? Time to have a think or to do this. Yes, it's pause time. The start of any Paper 1 Section B response must be interesting, especially a talk or a speech. Here, I plan to bombard my audience of complacent parents with appalling statistics about the prevalence of childhood obesity. This is emphatically not just a problem in the USA, but here in England and here within our very own county of Hampshire. Before giving advice to these parents about how to help their children eat healthier food, I'm going to continue to set the context. I plan to reference a case study, and notice how I've listed the fictional names I will use in my article within the plan. Mina Wolfson, 16, from the idyllic village of Turvey in Bedfordshire. In the space of 3 years, she deteriorated from an initially healthy, sporty state to having a heart attack and dying, almost certainly caused by obesity. In my 3rd paragraph, I plan to start exploring things closer to home and to build up empathy with my audience. Arguably, it's harder now than any other time in history to be a parent. Our children live so much of their life online, and so it is harder to build relationships and influence the ones we love. Partly due to COVID and partly due to a different landscape with unnecessary deference to others being consigned to history, we can struggle to get our children to listen to us. Now I've built up, it's time to tackle the question head on. Always keep looking back at the question in the exam to ensure that you're sharply focused. So my first piece of practical advice is to introduce changes to food gradually. Even just one additional portion of vegetables or salad 3 times a week can be a great starting point. We also need to communicate clearly to our children about the positive health benefits of this. Whereas a chocolate bar may give us a great lift for 15 minutes or so, vegetables and fruit will release energy in a slower way, more conducive to your mental well-being. Another practical piece of advice relates more to younger children than teenagers. Why not make healthier eating fun? Introduce a competitive element or give the younger child a delicious sense of responsibility by getting them to cut the healthy vegetables up into crazy shapes. Remember that you need to have enough content for Paper 1 Section B. You need to have enough facts. So another piece of advice is to change the contents of the cupboards over time so that sugary products are gradually phased out or at least reduced. Also think about positioning. Make those carrot and celery sticks easiest to find. I recommend a single sentence paragraph for both Paper 1 Section B and Paper 2. Why not write this sentence out in full within your plan? This one is a bit cheesy, but probably in a speech, you need to be a little cheesy from time to time. In 10 years' time, your children will thank you for these changes from the bottom of their hearts. Remember to incorporate rhetorical devices within your Paper 1 Section B response, especially a talk or a speech. When using rhetorical questions, please don't make them too obvious or cliched. I like the idea of a set of 3 rhetorical questions. Note that I've written the first one out in full. How many of you sitting here today are going to rush back home, chuck out the chocolate, and safeguard your children's futures? The best Paper 1 Section B responses will shift focus from time to time in an engaging way. I aim to do this here by giving the last word to the bereaved mother of Mina Wolfson, thus bringing home to my audience the seriousness of my message. In June 2023, the other question asks you to write an article for the magazine to describe a moment when you change your ideas about life, and the title was "That Was When My Journey Began." So how would you plan a 9-paragraph response for this question? What would you include within each paragraph? How and where would you shift focus to keep the reader engaged? Time to have a think about this. Yes, press pause now. Remember the importance of engaging the reader, the examiner, early doors. Here, I'm going to go hell for leather, depicting your typical lazy, filthy teen. I'm going to be hyperbolic, including a simile about a bomb and other splendid details about the chaotic nature of the room. Those disposable vapes, Cadbury's, fruit and nut wrappers, squished monster cans, etc. Within this magazine article for young people, I'm then going to shift to something more serious, a conversation with my father alone in the car. The father is displeased, to say the least, with the various uncomplimentary comments in my Year 10 reports. He wants me to take a good, long, careful look at myself. Triggering the dramatic single-sentence paragraph in which the title and question is repeated. That was when my journey began. So from paragraph 4, I begin to turn over a new leaf. Family members, friends, astounded. Before going into more detail about my journey, I switched to a quotation from Professor Anthony Dankin from the University of Warwick. He has some intelligent sounding things to say about the correlation between organisation and longer term success. It really does make a difference. Within school, there are some difficult decisions to make, including asking to be moved to the front of a number of classes to reduce distraction and temptation. I plan to have some fun with the reaction of one particularly cynical teacher, that old history veteran, yes, the one with the out-of-control beard, Dr. Moorstone. The relationship between father and son is important in this magazine article, with the son clearly being motivated to some extent by his father's disappointment. Thus, when he says, "You seem to be making a few changes, son," the implication is that this helps motivate and encourage the previously slothful one. I want to avoid cliches, to avoid magical, unrealistically sounding transformations. Hence this more reflective paragraph about how difficult it was remaining on this journey to becoming a different person. At the end of the magazine article, I confirm that the journey has resulted in some unexpectedly good, not perfect, GCSE grades. I want to end with a reaction from my father. We aren't too touchy-feely, but an understated handshake and a backslap mean a great deal. In June 2022, you could have written a magazine article aimed at persuading parents to allow their teenage children more freedom. How would you plan a 9-paragraph response for this question? What would you include within each paragraph? Time to have a think or to do this? Yes, press pause now. I'm not averse to a quasi-philosophical opening. The question is about allowing teenage children more freedom. But why not spend the first paragraph mulling over the importance of freedom to all of us, not just teenagers, but adults and animals too? In the second paragraph, I want to allay some of the concerns of parents reading the magazine article. Could it all result in disaster? If their offspring are allowed to come and go as they please, might they end up dabbling in cocaine or smoking weed? Well, within this paragraph, I want to point out the obvious. So many parents also took some pretty outrageous risks as teenagers. Given that they lived to tell the tale, why shouldn't their own children? Articles need facts. Articles need experts. Cue Professor Stanley Booth from the University of California. He has some wise words about the dangers of mollycoddling teenagers. In order to be able to learn and grow, they must have a degree of freedom. Clipping their wings may lull their parents into a false sense of security, but it won't ultimately do them any good. Remember to bring in other perspectives within your Paper 1 Section B responses. Here, Henry McKenna, a parent from Glasgow, reflects on how his ultra-strict regime ultimately blew up in his face. Paper 1 Section B responses need reasons and points. Well, one key advantage of giving teenagers more freedom is that the domestic environment will be happier. With more dialogue, as opposed to strict diktats, parents and children will develop a greater understanding of each other. Another key advantage of giving teenagers more freedom is that they are likely to mature earlier. Yes, in the short term, there may be a dip, but there is evidence, which I've made up of course, that these pupils are likely to achieve grades on average 18% higher than their mollycoddled, shackled counterparts. I will then introduce Antonio Jacobi, 18, in my 7th paragraph. He will be frank, disarmingly so. I'm not going to lie, he tells us. I used to stay up all night flicking through TikTok, YouTube shorts, and messaging my mates. However, one night something clicked. Now, of his own accord, he's studying Italian online and preparing a thesis on artificial intelligence. Your readers, or audience in a speech, like being empathised with. I will suggest in this paragraph that it is harder now than at any other time in history to be a parent. Our children live so much of their life online, and so it is harder to build relationships and influence the ones we love. We can struggle to get our children to listen to us, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Circular structures work well for creative writing, and sometimes for magazine articles too. Let's return to the crucial overriding point. All of us have a natural human instinct to want to be free. In November 2019, you could have written an article for a travel magazine describing a dramatic encounter with an animal. How would you plan a 9-paragraph response? What would you include within each paragraph? Have a think about this. Press pause now. This article is about a dramatic encounter with an animal. Well, in my first paragraph, I'm going to introduce this animal, and it's one that I've always been obsessed with since watching an obscure documentary about them on National Geographic, presented by the one and only gravelly voiced David Attenborough. I will then switch immediately to a flight to the capital of Zimbabwe, Harare. I plan to use personification to illustrate the extent of my excitement, which I will show, not tell. There's no need to tell the reader explicitly that I'm going to Zimbabwe to try to see a warthog. This is likely to be bleeding obvious given that my first paragraph was all about them. Remember to list plenty of names of places in your Paper 1 Section B responses. So here I set up camp in Matobo National Park. In this paragraph I take the opportunity to describe the setting in detail, the sun, the mountains, the shadows as the sun sets. I may use memorised descriptive phrases primarily intended for Paper 2 Section B. Next is the obligatory single sentence paragraph. And then it appeared. Note that I don't say the warthog. I leave this to the reader's imagination, common sense. When I see a warthog for the first time in the flesh, of course I'm going to soak in every tiny detail. The two tusks, the dusty hooves, the little tuft at the end of the tail. Again, some paper 2 section B-esque atmospheric description. Remember the value of shifting focus away from something interesting before returning 1 or 2 paragraphs later. Here I foreshadow what occurs with my quotation from Dr. Ernest Jones at the University of California. 2 men were killed in recent years in separate incidents involving warthogs in South Africa and Ghana. Now for the action, and remember you should always aim to avoid melodrama and have far more build-up than action in your own piece. The warthog charges, and I plan to draw out every second with plenty of hyperbole and a simile about my previous hero's aggression. Time for another different perspective here, and this time it's from my brother. Christian is normally so calm, so collected. However, when the warthog began to charge towards him, he looked panic-stricken and screamed out loud in a strange, high-pitched voice. In my final paragraph, my tone is reflective. Maybe I over-romanticize warthogs in the past. Maybe, like other wild animals, they should just be left to their own devices and their simple lives of hunting, eating, and sleeping.